Good evening. There is a line often attributed to great writers of our time that fiction does not merely reflect the world. It prepares us to see it more clearly. And tonight's gathering is a celebration of precisely that idea, of literature as a lens, a provocation, at times a warning. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the CEO of Avid Learning and the curator here at the Royal Opera House. On behalf of the royal family of Gondal, Ashish Doshi, Honorary Director, and myself, welcome to India's only surviving opera house. And you're probably sick of hearing me say this, and your city's very own cultural crown jewel. As you know, the literary arts is considered one of the most important and robust segments of Avid's curatorial vision. Since our inception in 2009, we have strived to bring fresh perspectives, voices to our maximum city through consistently curated programming. We have collaborated with festivals, publishers, authors, and thought leaders to provide the city with opportunities and experiences that will long be remembered. Last year alone, we presented and participated in more than 10 diverse literary engagements. 5 of them was on this very stage. Personally, this evening has an air of nostalgia as we kick off our first program for 2026, as we re-engage with many of our old, long-time collaborators and friends. It is a pleasure to welcome back Jnanpith award-winning author Amitav Ghosh for the 4th time on the Royal Opera House stage. Many of you were here for the launch of Gun Island in 2019, Smoke and Ashes in 23, and Wild Fictions last year. And it's a great pleasure to have among us one of the world's most influential writers of our times. We're also delighted to have journalist and author Raghu Kannad with us this evening. This is Raghu's 3rd program with us and 2nd one in a row right here. A continuation of our 16-year-long partnership with Literature Live, now under the visionary leadership of Quasar and Amy. The month of November has become synonymous with literary excellence, curiosity, and cultural exchanges in Mumbai. Avid Learning is proud to continue engaging with this beloved platform beyond the festival itself. And who knows, perhaps one day these festival conversations might find a home on this very stage. HarperCollins Publishers India, Udyan, Anand, Akriti, and Nena, it's always lovely to have you back, and as though we are guided by the fates of literature themselves, this special evening has been willed into existence. And this brings me to the task at hand. The Royal Opera House, Mumbai, Literature Live, HarperCollins Publishers India, and Avid Learning welcome you to the Mumbai launch of author Amitav Ghosh's new book, Ghost Eye. He will be in conversation with journalist and author Raghu Kannad. Thank you all for being here in such great numbers, especially with a plethora of cultural events happening today, so much appreciated. To take this evening forward, please welcome Artistic Director, QTP Entertainment, and Co-Director, Literature Live, Quasar Thakur Padamsi. Thank you very much and enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Asad. And welcome, everyone, to our first Literature Live evening of the year, and a Happy New Year to everyone from Amy, myself, and the rest of the Literature Live team. For some of you who know and saw a little bit in the film, Literature Live was a weird idea by a gentleman called Mr. Anil Dharkar. And we are probably best known for the Mumbai Lit Fest, which happens every November, that Asad talked about. We're basically a bunch of literature lovers who enjoy books and enjoy authors and enjoy conversations about books. So essentially, this is a drawing room that we're just trying to share with everyone. We're quite active through many things that we do. We do the Little Festival, which is for kids. We run the Literary Awards, which is for books of the year in fiction, non-fiction, and business. We run the Anil Dharkar Literature Live Independence Lecture that happens every August. We do a lot of stuff on campuses and colleges to try and reach out and competitions and things like that. And of course, we do Literature Live evenings like this, which are essentially book launches that happen through the year with authors that we love and we'd like to just share with other people. The reason many of us fell in love with books is actually the author today. I think a lot of us who grew up in the late 90s and 2000s fell in love with Indian writing thanks to Shadowlines. And I think that opened a door for a lot of us. And it's amazing that we can stand here today. I get to hang out with him in the dressing room for a little bit. So proper fan moment. But also the fact that this is a work of fiction that is coming to us after 6 years since his last work of fiction. But what is lovely about the book, and I'm sure you'll hear about it a little later, is that soul of, I'd like to say, the environmental revolutionary that he is, remains in the book. And it is a wonderful, wonderful journey through it. So thank you to him, and thank you to Raghu for agreeing to do this conversation on our behalf. Thank you to Avid and the Royal Opera House, which is just a beautiful place to have this. HarperCollins, who are long-time collaborators in the world of publishing and also just generally in trying to get books out to more and more people. But before I call Uday Mitra, who's the executive publisher of HarperCollins, I just want to wish everyone a joyous, peaceful 2026, and also happy reading.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to start by joining Quasar in saying Happy New Year to everyone. May it be a year full of good books and happy reading in advance. My name is Uday Mitra. I'm executive publisher at HarperCollins. Great privilege to be back here, possibly my favorite venue in India for book events. And wonderful to partner once again with Literature Live, Avid Learning, and Royal Opera House, the triumvirate that brings you magical evenings to do with books and arts and culture. It's my very pleasant duty to very quickly introduce Amitav Ghosh, who doesn't need an introduction, of course, but just to say that for close on 40 years, he's been writing and entertaining us and making us think and building worlds for us to explore. And that is both with his fiction and his nonfiction. We go back, many of us who are of my generation grew up with The Circle of Reason, Shadowlands, Calcutta Chromosome. And then on we moved to the Ibis trilogy and followed by Gun Island. It's been 6 years since Gun Island. Before Ibis trilogy, of course, there was The Glass Palace and The Hungry Tide. And, but parallel to this, there is Amitav's nonfiction. His travelogue in an Antique Land is still one of my favorite books. And then The Great Derangement set the benchmark for writing on climate change 10 years ago, followed by Nutmeg's Curse, and then Smoke and Ashes, last year, Wild Fictions, and two special books that I must mention, two small books, which if you haven't discovered them yet, you'll find them outside, Jungle Nama and The Living Mountain. It's an oeuvre of work that's not only impressive, but it has, for many people, been defining and life-changing. And Amitav has been honored across the world for his writing. And in India, he was the first winner of the Jnanpith Prize for someone writing in English. He still remains the only author to have been writing in English to win the Jnanpith. And in 2024, he was awarded the Erasmus Prize, which is a very prestigious prize for in the space of climate writing and environmentalism. Last year, he was awarded the Park Kyung-ni Prize, which is awarded by Korea. We are going to have him here with us on stage in a minute. With him, in conversation with him will be Raghu Karnad, writer, journalist, author of the wonderful book, The Farthest Field, which is on Indians in the Second World War. And very quickly on Ghostai, it's early in the year, and we published Ghostai about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so you might not have had a chance to read it yet. You'll have seen the video, and I'm sure those of you who haven't read it yet are intrigued. It starts with a very dramatic moment of, this is Calcutta in 1969, and Varsha, who is 3 years old and belongs to a Marwari family, a strictly vegetarian family in Calcutta, one day refuses to have her food and says, I want to have fish. And of course, there is horror in the household. This is a strictly vegetarian family. Fish has never entered the household. How did Varsha even know of fish? But then this is explored, and a psychiatrist then brands the case as, this is a technical term, a case of the reincarnation type. And there the story begins, and then, if I may use the word, it just unspools itself across decades. We move to something close to present-day Brooklyn. So this is a novel about Bengal and about Brooklyn. It's a novel about time. It's a novel about remembrance and memory. It's a novel about perception, how you see things differently as time changes, as geographies change, and that is also connected to the title Ghost Eye. It's about how humans relate to each other, but most importantly, it's about how humans relate to nature and how nature relates to humans. This is, of course, one of Ghosh's favorite themes, and here he explores it in an unforgettable way. I will not talk more about the book because you must read it for yourself. It is completely arresting. It's also a page-turner. And it's just an immensely rewarding experience. I'm so glad that there's a new novel from Amitav Ghosh, and it's now in our hands. Ghost Eye is published first in India. Amitav is one of the very few internationally renowned Indian authors who choose to publish first in India. UK will publish the book in February, USA will publish in June, but we here are privileged to have the book in our hands now. That's all from me. May I invite on stage Amitav Ghosh, Raghu Karnad, and we'll start with the formal unveiling of the book, for which may I invite on stage Amy Fernandez from Literature Live, Kausar Padamsee again, and from Avid Learning, Asad Lalji. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, Amitav. Over to you, Raghu.
Thank you, Udayan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Hello. I know we have some folks all the way up top, so hello to you, too. Thank you. It's so wonderful to begin the year in this magical place with all of you, and with the I'm feeling in the aura of this really extraordinary book. So thank you to Amitav. Welcome to Bombay.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you for doing this, and thank you to Amy and to Literature Live and to Kausar and Asad for hosting me here yet again. This is really such an extraordinary place. I mean, whenever I go backstage, I'm always thinking of the Phantom of the Opera, you know. A ghost, of course.
Watch out for the chandelier. So this book is like I said, it's quite extraordinary. It builds and builds until it's full of wonders and surprises. And you could describe it as a supernatural kind of detective novel or a mystery in which the prime evidence or clue is fish curry. Or you could also describe it as a culinary novel, which also explores its connections seriously enough out of the kitchen and into the and through the market and through the fishing boats, into the estuaries, into the rivers, and really from there to the deepest levels and deepest levels of connection with nature and with the nature of the world we live in. So there's a great deal to talk about, and it only makes sense to begin at the most intimate level. There's a lot in this book that is very deeply personal, actually, I think, even in comparison to others of Amitav's books. So we'll start at the personal level, which is fish curry in this case. This is very distinctly a book written by a cook. It's a book in which the interest in food is not motivated solely by intellectual inquiry, but by the desire to convey some of the love, both of eating and of understanding food. Now, I know this because I have had the privilege of eating some of the food that Amitav's cooked himself. And tell me, this is the question, have you explored cooking in your writing more to a deeper extent in this book than before?
Oh, that's absolutely the case. And I mean, food is a big part of many of my books, but not as much as this. I mean, this is a book, I think of it as a book about food. Because, you know, food is the primary medium through which we human beings relate to our environment, you know, to our ecologies, and to each other. You know, food is just absolutely the central thing in life. I mean, there's nothing more important than food. And yet, food very rarely figures in literature. And, you know, it's so strange. I mean, I often now when I read a book, I'm just waiting to see any reference to food, you know. I mean, in Dostoevsky, there's never a reference to food. I'm just waiting, you know, for them to mention blinis or something, but never.
Well, I think it's really that's a strange omission because you're right that food touches us very deeply and it evokes interest immediately. You can get people interested in a conversation about food effortlessly. And there's something immediately moving about the time that this novel spends in the kitchen. So I do know that your other novels are deeply interested in food, but that's why I was specifying the word cooking. Because cooking is very important here and has an almost like the denouement kind of hinges on a cooking challenge, not to give you any spoilers. I want to talk a little bit about your experience I want you to talk about how your experience in the kitchen as a cook informed some of the writing itself in this book. But I also am curious about whether you learned things that you wanted to learn, whether there was a process of education about a cuisine that you loved that's also reflected in here. Because I related to the protagonist. The protagonist in this book, Dinu, loves to eat fish curry, has grown up in Calcutta, but professes that he realizes, oh, I don't actually know anything about fish. Not the anatomy of fish, not the ecology that they come from. And in fact, it's quite easy to eat a lot of fish curry without ever really knowing what the actual fish looks like.
Yep.
But if you read Ghost Eye, you're also getting an education in fish. Like it's filling in this gap for people like me, because I definitely related to Dinu's situation. So I was wondering, were you close to Dinu's position at the start of writing this? Or did you already know your way between Pabda and Katla and Karfu and Gojar Mach, etc., etc.?
Well, great that you remember all those names. Well, you know, it certainly used to be the case, and still is, that most Bengalis wake up, the first thing they think about is fish. You know, what fish are we going to have for lunch? And then what are we going to have for dinner? I mean, and I still do think in that way. I mean, not necessarily about fish, but what am I going to have for lunch and for dinner? Yeah, I knew quite a lot about fish because my mother was a very, very good cook. And, you know, she was very experimental with the sorts of Bengali food that she made. And I learned a lot from her, I would say, but I certainly know much more about fish now than I did before.
Including Latin names.
Yeah, I love that part of it. You know, I love the rhetoric of science, as it were, you know, all these Linnaean binomial names. I mean, they're they have a certain kind of ring, and I enjoy playing with them, you know, because, you know, we sometimes think that if I look at the humble Rohu and I say, wow, this is Labeo Rohita, you know, that somehow it becomes something more noble. But in fact, your humble fisherman or your housewife knows much more about that fish than does an ichthyologist. An ichthyologist can never know the taste of that fish in the way that they do.
Yes, which is, this kind of knowledge turns out to be crucial in the novel. And it includes what Amitav describes as haptic knowledge. Haptic meaning relating to a sense of touch. And I thought that was very interesting because, of course, to eat fish, especially a fish like ilish, involves such a careful use of your fingers and of your sense of touch to probe the meat, the actual flesh of the fish for bones, and you have to sort of navigate it. These are all things that I'm learning especially well because I'm married to someone who's from Orissa. And I have also now begun to, later in life, gain some slow education in fish and how to navigate the
Well, you
flesh
must know,
of the ilish.
We Bengalis really look down on Uriya ilish.
Well, I might have to call her up here to take over in that case, but maybe it can wait for later.
Which I think is completely wrong, because Uriya ilish is actually really wonderful.
Do you mean it's a different fish or a different preparation?
I don't know, the water changes the taste.
The water changes the
So
taste.
the best ilish is actually from Bangladesh, the Poddar ilish we say. So even West Bengal ilish is, for us aficionados, it's not the best.
Okay, well, for the record, I disagree. And, but again, there's so much in this that I wonder if some of this is obviously a refraction of you, the protagonist. In other ways, it's a refraction of all of us. There's a line that I loved in which also applies to the cooking in my in-laws' household, which is that you say Bengali cookery is a domestic art practiced in secluded niches of the household by people who rely on memories that are stored not in their heads but in their hands and fingers. Their methods cannot be easily reduced to printed instructions because the very fact of their being committed to paper often vitiates their authenticity, which was a wonderful line for me because I've seen my partner try to glean good recipes out of her family members, and there's just no written recipe available.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And actually, that's my approach to cooking, really, is that it's haptic, you know. I mean, I rely on my senses, I rely on my skills, such as they are. And, you know, recipes are sometimes helpful, but the recipe books for Bengali cooking really don't tell you about the peasant cookery, you know. So in this book, there's no mention of ilish, tenua loza ilisha, as it's known in Latin, because it's a kind of elite fish. Whereas I'm really much more interested in the peasant fish, because those are the species that really relate people much more closely to the land and the river and the ecology and the environment. Because really, through consuming those kinds of fish, you know, that's when the land comes alive for you. You know, the land and its legends and its ways of being. Because it's such an extraordinary thing if you think about it. You know, when you're eating this creature, really, it's a transubstantiation, really. The loaves and fishes, you know. That's what you have in the Bible. Why? It's not loaves and goats, it's loaves and fishes.
And this is not a question I had prepared, but it strikes me now that it's a creature that is more alien to us than some of the other creatures we eat. I certainly have a better understanding of, for instance, the anatomy and the life cycle of most of the land-based creatures that are part of my diet than fish are. And fish occupy a more mysterious and, to me, as an urban consumer, niche in the ecology that is more remote from my understanding. So that gap in understanding is a very crucial part of the novel, of course. And the book starts with as large a gap in social understanding, cultural understanding, as is possible. It's the gap between a rigidly vegetarian Marwari family in Calcutta and this persona that emerges inside the family, inside their youngest member, a young girl, of a rural Bengali woman who is dying to eat fish and rice and who will not relent on that demand. So what's happening, as we discover fairly early on, is a case of reincarnation, which is extremely interesting to me because I realize that despite living in this country where reincarnation is, you know, theoretically a crucial part of our majority kind of metaphysics, I've never really given it much thought, except in silly ways, like when people go to kind of lifestyle therapy sort of sessions to figure out which French princess they were in their last life. This novel, right from the start, challenges you to take reincarnation quite seriously. And I wanted to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind, because it did lead me to think about this. To talk about reincarnation and the other uncanny, anomalous phenomena that grow inside this book is to talk about the possibility that when someone dies, they don't vanish forever, that it's not over. And one of the lines with which the book describes this is the greatest divide in human history is the gulf that separated the living and the dead. But as we find out, quote, there's a spectral dimension that mediated between the living and the dead. And this dimension gets crossed when young Varsha suddenly remembers her previous life as a fisherwoman. I was wondering whether events in your personal life, including the birth of your first grandchild, congratulations,
Thank you,
have made you think about this kind of cycle of life and death and where life comes from and where life goes. I know that actually within your life, within recent years, there have been both deaths that are very important and births. So is that where this interest in reincarnation begins? Somewhere close to home?
In a sense, yes. Because, my mother, she died in the pandemic year when I was trapped in Brooklyn, and I couldn't come to Calcutta to see her. Fortunately, my sister was there, many other caregivers. But in January of that year, I was in Calcutta, and she had very advanced COPD, so she would have these terrible bouts of COPD, when she would have to be hospitalized. And I was there when she was hospitalized, and there was this really sort of bizarre event. I was with her, my wife, who's here, we were both with her, and suddenly something happened, and she took my hand, and she literally said goodbye, in the way that she used to say goodbye to me, when I was going off to boarding school as a boy. And then she went into this strange kind of trance-like state with her head thrown back, and she was talking about what she was seeing on the other side, in Bangla. She was telling me what she was seeing. She was seeing this light. She was seeing people coming towards her. And, what she was actually having was a classic near-death experience. There's a huge literature on near-death experiences now. A lot of doctors have written about these near-death experiences. And we know that people actually have these near-death experiences and then come back from some other realm, And what happened in her case is that, a doctor suddenly arrived and, gave her an injection, which kind of, revived her, so to speak, because all her indicators were flattening. But suddenly she was revived. And once she came back into consciousness, what she did was she looked at me and said, "Why did you bring me back? It was my time. I wanted to go." And this is a very common experience, many people have this experience with elderly relatives. At a certain point, someone is ready, So watching that near-death experience, it really unlocked something for me. Because what was she talking about? What was she describing, And then I started reading the literature on near-death experiences. And in a way, near-death experiences happen in the same realm as reincarnation. So what it awakes you to is the existence of a parallel universe, a universe parallel to us, which does not exist within the same, time and space continuum as our normal life. And that was a very powerful experience for me. And then, completely coincidentally, when the book was almost finished, suddenly, we discovered we were going to have a grandson. And that was a really wonderful thing. I mean, his coming back, his coming into the world has been such a sort of powerful experience for me. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear more about that. Obviously, we're going a little bit into deeply personal terrain. I don't want to force you, but it's so wonderful and so interesting. A couple of years ago, when we had a chat for a previous novel, it was right after my father died, and we reflected on that, and that was very powerful as well.
If I may stop you there, you said you hadn't thought about reincarnation much, which is a very strange thing for the son of Girish, who wrote Transposed Heads.
I guess I should have read it. I've read it. But yeah, somehow that possibility, that metaphysics, is relegated for us in a way that other metaphysical schemes are not. I mean, one certainly hears a lot about heaven and hell, and I don't put much stock in that idea. But after reading this book in particular, I have a lot to think about with reincarnation, and I will ask you a few more questions about it. But since you've just told us about this astonishing experience you had with your mother, and of course, after you have that experience, you can't put it out of mind. You have to give it thought. You were already thinking about phenomena beyond the kind of mechanistic view of the world that many of us have, years before that. And this book is in some ways a companion to Amitav's previous novel, Gun Island. It's in many ways in conversation with lots of his other books, but especially with The Great Derangement. And I'll ask you another question about that. But The Great Derangement came out in 2016.
Yes.
And already there you were pushing back against a too heavily materialistic, mechanistic, rationalist view of the world and the universe. And subsequently to that, other things have happened in your life, including this experience with your mother, including the strange, uncanny experience of the pandemic.
Yes.
So did all of that sort of quicken the feeling that the materialist scheme of our understanding of the world was just not enough?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was the process of writing The Great Derangement and even more writing The Nutmeg's Curse that I really came to the realization that this sort of scientistic, materialist, mechanistic understanding of the universe is not the solution, it's the problem. That's what's brought us, into a sort of state where really we see the world heading towards the abyss, And one reason for that is that this scientific, materialist vision of the world really, in claiming to explain every kind of phenomenon, it exhausts the world of all its mystery, And in exhausting the world of its mystery, it takes away our sense of wonder. It leads us to the false idea that we understand everything in the world, because we don't. We certainly don't understand reincarnation. And the fact that science doesn't recognize reincarnation, although Carl Sagan did, even though science may not recognize it, that tells us nothing about reincarnation. It tells us about the limitations of science. Because what we actually have, there's a huge amount of research being done on reincarnation, and there are thousands and thousands of verified cases, which cannot be explained in any other way, of children who wake up. It often happens via food. And food That is because, as I said, food is so fundamental to our existence. But the way that it usually happens in India is, a child will wake up in a vegetarian family, and they begin to demand a meat.
So these are documented
These are
instances.
documented, many documented cases. Or it'll happen the other way around. A child will wake up in a meat-eating family, and they'll start stopping their parents from eating meat. No, because they've come from a Brahmin family or a Baniya family. So it's a very interesting thing in India that these dietary preferences are absolutely fundamental to reincarnation. But also, many of these cases hinge on language. A child will wake up and start, or not suddenly at the age of about 3, will start speaking a language that no one in their family knows. And this is not just in India. One community that is very much invested in reincarnation is the Druze of Lebanon. And I don't know if you know the writer Rabi Alamuddin. Did you meet him at our house?
No, but I've read the Hakawati.
Well, he's got a wonderful new book out, It won the National Book Award this year. So he read this book, and immediately he started sending me these reincarnation stories from his family, and they all hinge on food. So it's a really interesting aspect of that phenomenon, because in a way, it integrates our this other universe with our material universe.
And another way in which the connection between past lives and food taboos is interesting is one you definitely get in the opening pages of this book, which is that if your young child is suddenly violating your most essential food taboos, then there's no way to ignore it. This is a problem. This is a serious problem that you can't ignore. You might be able to ignore it if they're somehow like professing that they had another identity. I'm sure that is indistinguishable from a lot of children's play. But if suddenly they're insisting that they will eat or not eat something that is so culturally essential and like morally essential to you, then like it's a crisis. And so that kind of crisis is exactly what the book begins with. There's another interesting thing that I realized about the philosophy of reincarnation, which I'd never thought about before, which is that it has very powerful, potent ecological ramifications. And you think about the world that we live in today, where we are moving in deeper into a disrupted climate, and the people who have the most power or responsibility with regards to that, people with a lot of money and a lot of political clout, their main response seems to be to protect themselves, to safeguard their own lives for the rest of their lifetime, right? So you can build your billionaire bunker. This is the classic situation. You build a billionaire bunker, and you can more or less guarantee that with that money and with that protection, you will be safe and comfortable for the rest of your life. And then you die, and it's not your problem. That seems to be the philosophy with which a lot of people are addressing our crisis, our ecological crisis now. But reincarnation implies that you can't run away that way. You can't get away from the planet that you're creating, or from whatever you're creating, because your life will, your being will return, even if it's not in the same lifetime, even if it's in another lifetime. Does that make sense?
That's absolutely right, yes. But it also implies something else. It implies that there is this other dimension. There are these other universes that exist in parallel with ours, and they're deeply interested in us. And maybe they will step in, when we fail. Right. That's why you see these light phenomena manifesting around nuclear sites. That's been going on for, since the 1930s and 40s. And, it's actually a startling fact that these light phenomena are actually increasing, So every now and then you'll see, the Danish are saying, oh, the Russians are sending drones to us. But in fact, they're actually, a lot of them are these inexplicable sorts of light phenomena. So in New Jersey and New York last year, uh, there was this absolute sort of outbreak of these light phenomena, which they kept saying, these are drones, but nobody ever saw one of these drones land. No one saw it take off. They had no readable signals around them. So, maybe this other world is getting more interested in us.
That I honestly, I think I'm still steeped, so steeped in my rationalism that I find it very hard to open my mind to that. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that.
No.
But the novel, and this is something that the novel does so successfully, is that in the novel, these phenomena have this kind of gathering strength. It begins in a very kind of, in a very genteel and peaceful setting in Kolkata, which is interwoven with, so there's like a past time frame in Kolkata, and then there's a present time frame in pandemic, in lockdown-bound Brooklyn. And there's some communication between those two. But this is very much our real lives, our real worlds, past and present. And then these phenomena begin to gather strength in the novel. And they have different names. There are different ways of referring to them and thinking about them. The novel refers to them as eruptions, or it refers to them as synchronicities or anomalies. And there's a word that's very crucial to the great derangement, which is just the uncanny, the way in which things that are more than just metaphorical resonances appear, especially out of the natural world. So the form these take are very much linked to nature, and sometimes they are. Sometimes it's a particular animal, especially a snake.
Yes.
Sometimes a fish.
Yes.
But sometimes it's something much larger, like a weather phenomenon.
Yeah.
There's a few places where you just subtly use the language when you're describing a cyclone to hint that the cyclone itself has a sort of agency or a sort of purpose.
Yes, I've been thinking about that for a long time, the agency of weather phenomena and so on. But, many of these other phenomena are so well documented. For example, in 1968, in Cairo, an apparition appeared above a church, an apparition of the Virgin Mary, and it kept reappearing for almost 2 years. It was witnessed by thousands of people, including Gamal Abdel Nasser. And, there's an anthropologist who wrote a book about it. It was seen, it was recorded, it was photographed, and it was there. Where do these phenomena come from? And many such phenomena have been seen, So that, again, really makes you realize that the world is much, much more mysterious than we imagine.
Yeah, I have to agree. And again, while commenting on this from a rigidly rationalist perspective, I often felt while I was reading the book, Amitav, that the uncanny was spilling out of the book into my actual life, which was very disturbing, but also enjoyable. For instance, we live in this apartment in Bandra where there are lots of crows around. They're always, making a racket. And sometimes I try to make friends with them because I like to attempt a little bit of interspecies camaraderie. And I was in the middle of reading a passage in the book. This is not a spoiler, but there's a passage in the book in which Dinu is at a loose end and is wandering through a park and feeds a crow and gets a sort of sign from that crow. And while I was in the middle of reading that passage, my partner came up to me and said, "Your crow is waiting for you on your balcony."
Wow, yeah, that's a synchronicity.
It's a synchronicity. I mean, like you could call it another word, you could call it a coincidence, but when you're actually doing this, you think, oh, well, crows, right? They know things. They're almost certainly supernatural beings. So that really struck me, and immediately I thought, how strange. This leapt out of the page, and it happened like it emerged into my flat, and there you go. So.
Well, you know, that's one of the weird things about the uncanny. When you open the door to it, suddenly it comes flooding in ways that are sometimes really scary and sometimes really wonderful. You know, I have a very good friend. Her name is Liz Jensen. She's a wonderful writer. She's of English origin, but she's married to a very famous Danish writer. And they had a son together, 2 sons, but one son who became a very prominent environmental activist. And suddenly, in his mid-20s, he very suddenly died, you know. And it was a devastating experience for Liz and her husband and so on. But she's written a beautiful book about this, how very soon after his death, he began appearing to her, you know. And then birds would do very strange things around her. And there were times when she would say to him, or this voice that was speaking to her, she would say, look, I need more proof. If you're really there, send me this bird. And the bird would actually come. You know, it happened to her several times that the bird manifested. You know, it's a really wonderful book. Read it. I think you'd enjoy it.
What's the book called?
It has a very long title, which I always forget. But just look up Liz Jensen books and you'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think that that a place where I can certainly arrive at myself is the possibility that some kind of sentience, some kind of purpose exists in the natural world, or just in the world outside of our individual selves that we don't fully comprehend, and that isn't part of the how we you know, structure our understanding of the world.
I would like to say here that you know, I'm very heavily trained in rationalism.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a PhD.
I've been wondering if this is difficult for you at all to come around to this, to talk about this in front of an audience who might be like, well, that's nuts.
You know, it's because I'm so deeply steeped in that I also know its limitations. And now I'm at a point in my life where I recognize those limitations. And most of all, I recognize that, you know, that kind of rationalistic, materialist worldview is brought us to the edge of disaster. And we have to recognize that.
So that's the perfect segue to what my question was going to be, because there is a larger movement of thought around this possibility, right? And I was earlier this year reading through Robert Macfarlane's book, Can a River Be Alive?, in which he very systematically thinks through the possibility that a river might be a being that should be granted a set of rights. Just like you and I have rights, that a river might be treated with rights. And there is actually an emerging, as Ghostai also refers to, there's an emerging body of legal thinking, sort of pioneered in New Zealand around...
Ecuador.
Oh, Ecuador, thank you, yes. Around the possibility of rivers as bodies with rights. So, have you met Robert Macfarlane? Have you two talked?
Yes, we're friends.
Have you had a public conversation?
We've not had a public conversation, but he's a good friend of mine, and we exchange stuff all the time. In fact, I blurbed that book.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So anyway, the thought that Rob Macfarlane writes about 3 rivers, one of which is the Coombe in Chennai. But the thought that came to my mind was that this was the perfect sort of response from Amitav, which is to speak of the Sundarbans, which is not a river, but something arguably even greater, more complicated, more mysterious. And so the Sundarbans are your great sort of like decades-long interest and preoccupation. And so now the Sundarbans becomes a sort of being in this book and a site for an eruption of the mysterious and the non-rational. So can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Sundarbans all the way back from Hungry Tide to the present and the choice in this moment to treat the Sundarbans as a site of a sort of revelation?
Well, I have a very long relationship with the Sundarban going back to my childhood because one of my uncles actually lived and worked there. So it's occupied a very important part in my imagination. You know, I've written The Hungry Tide and many other books which touch upon the Sundarban. And of course, for people who live in the Sundarban, what is very important for them is actually the legends of the Sundarban, you know, especially the legend of Bon Bibi, you know, she's like the spirit of the forest who regulates between the human and the non-human. And I've written about that at great length. I've even translated it, you know, in my little book, Jungle Nama. But, you know, you referred to Robert Macfarlane, and he's a very good example because Robert Macfarlane is a professor at Cambridge. And, you know, even more steeped in rationalism than you are, maybe. But Rob has slowly, but, you know, very carefully begun to recognize that maybe our ancestors were right. Rivers did have personhood. And, you know, that's why a lot of that book is about the rights of nature movement. And for me, the rights of nature movement is the most hopeful development that I see, you know, in all the environmental movements around the world. Because, you know, they've won case after case. In Odisha, the Supreme Court recognized a mountain as a living being. In Uttarakhand, it's also been the case. It's been the case very much in Tamil Nadu, where rivers have been recognized by the judiciary as living beings. Not that it's protected them very much, but still a little bit it's protected them. But you know, the places where it's actually been strongest is New Zealand. You know, where the Wanganui River has been recognized not only as a living being, but as the ancestor of a tribe. And you know, when that judgment was passed, I was kind of amazed. I looked at the picture of the New Zealand judges, and there are all these old white guys dressed in, you know, in robes and things. And I thought, how does this lot of people decide on something like that? And you know, the case was solved for me. Have you ever seen those haka dances that they do in those posh New Zealand schools? And the moment you see that dance, which is a Maori dance, you recognize that opens a portal into something in their minds whereby, you know, a river can be a living being. But this has been the greatest source of resilience in the world around, you know, amongst environmental movements. And it's a very important thing, I think, because, you know, the moment you acknowledge that a mountain can, in some sense, exist in the same domain of personhood as a human being, already you're saying that we live in a multiverse. You know, we live in plural universes.
That's right. And I think this leads me to think about the other setting of the novel, which is not the Sundarbans, but as far as can be from that, which is Brooklyn, New York City. There's a lot of Amitav. I have to let people know that there's a lot of Amitav Ghosh's real life that has seeped into this narrative. And one of those things is the neighborhood of Fort Greene, which is where he and Debbie actually live most of the year. So what's happening in the New York City setting, is the pandemic. It's always strange to read a good description of pandemic life because you're taken aback and you're like, God, did we do that? Did we go through that? Did we sort of shrink from each other and refuse to touch and wash our hands for 45 minutes and all of that? I was doing it for 45 minutes, but...
You were? You had any skin left?
But the pandemic also was sort of revelatory about something. And it seemed, it's not something we thought about afterwards thoroughly. But certainly at the time, it revealed something for us briefly about our relationship with nature. So it was deeply destructive to human economy and to many, many livelihoods, and cast many people's individual lives into crisis. But while doing that, one of the things that many people witnessed was an efflorescence of natural life into many places. So this was obviously a conscious and careful choice to use the pandemic moment and your own observation of it from Fort Greene in this book, which otherwise is very much about Kolkata and the Sundarbans and so on. So tell us a little bit about your pandemic life, and were you taking notes? Like, some of it is very kind of diaristic.
Yes, I was. I mean, for me, the pandemic was a strange experience in a sense. But, no one is better fitted for the isolation of the pandemic than a writer, because we are isolated anyway. We sit in our studies and write all day. So it was nothing new to me. But I did feel very much for younger people, who are not used, who are not used to that kind of isolation. And we now know that they suffered terribly for it, They suffered in their schoolwork, in their private and personal lives. So the pandemic, I think it was really a kind of, turning point, It was a real turning point, and look at the world before and after the pandemic. It's almost unrecognizable.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're doing much better afterwards, although I thought we might come away from it with new wisdom and better sort of ways of relating to the world. But it seems like a little bit worse. But for you, was the pandemic kind of revealing of some of these possibilities, or of the ecological connections? I mean, in the most tangible way, it showed how thoroughly we were all connected.
I suppose, look, the pandemic turned Fort Greene into a magical place, because it was the seat of Zoran Mamdani's victory. That's where he celebrated. And there's nothing more magical than Zoran Mamdani's victory. This boy who I've seen grow up, he turned out to be a political genius.
Here, Zoran Mamdani. That is, now we can end on a happy note, thank God. I really thought I was dragging this down into despair. But yes, did you do much cooking during the pandemic? Was it a good time for that?
No, because you couldn't really get together with people, But once it began to ease up a bit, well, I had this little bubble, We created this little bubble. Meera was in it, for example. But also, the singer Ali Sethi, the artist Salman Toor, my friends Ravi Agarwal and his wife. And every now and then we would get together and I'd cook a meal, and it would be very restorative for us.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting thoughts that emerges from this book is how much more we could invest in the actual places where we spend time in our.
Absolutely.
The word place kind of really resonates in it. Yeah. And there's a sort of dodgy character who runs through it named Tipu, who says something that's very, very thought-provoking, in which he says, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I've just interpreted this through my own ideas, but he says, you people who are intellectuals can try and solve all of the world's problems like in your heads, but those of us who aren't intellectuals can only try and solve the problems in the places where we belong, where we know the language, where we know the ecology, where we know the people. And more and more, I think that there's a real, that there are real limits to how much we can solve intellectually, and there's great wisdom to to trying to grasp the places where we actually live.
Absolutely. You know, we tend to embrace this kind of very theoretical environmentalism, where one sort of solution found in one place is meant to apply across the world. But this is worth saying on a day when we've lost Madhav Gadgil, one of the great environmentalists.
Oh yes, today.
Today he died, yeah. I'm sure you knew him. And he was, he took the opposite view. I mean, he was a scientist, of course, he had a PhD and all that, but he very strongly supported indigenous systems of knowledge, and most of all on place-based solutions, you know.
I'm really sorry to hear that. Some of my friends over here, people who've worked with Madhav Gadgil. I think we should raise the house lights a little bit and bring the audience in while we still have some time for questions, especially since there are so many people in the house right now. Does anyone have questions? I think that after this book, Amitav, there's going to be some interest in an Amitav Ghosh cookbook. And there probably has been already, but you may not be able to fight it off any longer.
No, my cooking is completely haptic, as I said. So it can't be...
Right, you can't write it down.
You can't write it down.
Typical.
Hi.
Hello.
Huge fan. I have read the book. I want to know if you still have hope for the world, for the environment, right? Because if you look at it, if we look at it from a rational point of view, the world is in a really bad place, especially with the laws being passed, and nothing looks great, right? So you've taken a different route to it, a supernatural one. So I want to know if you really, is it the hopelessness which brings that point of view forth?
No, not at all. And as I said, you know, everything that has come out of our political systems is obviously leading us to ruin. You know, all the global systems have failed. All our systems of governance have failed. The COP process has become a joke, you know, literally a process of greenwashing and so on. The only thing the only movement that has gained traction and has presented solutions is the rights of nature movement, you know. And that's really based upon a sense of the, you know, you could call it on the personhood of the land, you know, and that, you can call it a supernatural notion if you like, but I don't think it's supernatural. I think it's recognizing something that's very true and real about the earth. There are places that are more alive than others. Human beings have always known this, you know. That's why we have, say, for example, India is a very good example. You know, there are so many sacred centers, if you like Kashi, you know, which is regarded as, you know, a place where something special manifests itself. And really, the whole world is dotted with places like that, everywhere.
Yeah, there's a nice phrase in the book, the world's hidden potentialities.
That's right, yes.
And I think the idea is that those hidden potentialities have real value, and there may even be ways for us not to harness them, because I don't think harnessing is the right metaphor.
But you could say harnessing, because look at this movement in the Aravalis. You know, they're all set to tear it down. I mean, to create another ecological disaster on top of everything else. Yeah. But young people have mobilized, and why have they mobilized? Because the Aravalis are special for them. They realize that it's more than just a geographical feature to be extracted from. Yeah. It has meaning. And as soon as you accept that a place can have meaning, maybe you're in the realm of the supernatural.
It's actually quite interesting to think about the ways in which local movements, even involving urban people like us, have had some success when they are about places that have meaning.
That's right.
And the RA forest is an obvious example here in Bombay. The forest in Goa, which created such an uproar of support and actually, I think, saved that forest from the railway development that was slated to go through it. Those seem to be providing examples of victory and possibility that we don't otherwise see.
Absolutely, because look, in that sort of rationalist, materialist worldview, no place should have meaning. All places are the same. You know, they exist only to be exploited and, you know, taken from, if you like. I mean, because they don't have any meaning. It's just dead earth, dead matter. You know, what movements like that express is very powerfully the feeling that no, places do have meaning beyond the ordinary.
Yeah. What was that extraordinary Native American movement somewhere?
Yeah, it was the No Dakota Pipeline movement.
Yes.
Yeah, they fought and fought and fought.
Yes, and
you know, in a way that secular movements simply cannot.
There's a lot of hands.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Samantha.
Two of you. I guess you can, one after the other. Samantha, you
yes.
first, and then...
Sure. So like we were talking, I mean, like a lot talking about, there's also like the Masai Mara, you know, uprising that's currently happening with J.W. Marriott, I think, who's trying to build a resort right in the middle of the wildebeest migration route. So that's there. And like, my question is, when we have all this ancient wisdom, there are a plethora of tribes, not just Indian, Maori, Native American, all of these people, we've always spoken, you know, if you look at our ancient texts, we always look at every living thing as having its own identity, its own persona. And do you think that in reincarnation, maybe we reincarnate even as these beings, as these existences?
That's a great question, actually.
Well, obviously, you know, the transmigration of souls is all about that, about being reborn as a tree or as an animal, and so on. I mean, if you accept the possibility of reincarnation, you also have to accept the possibility of the transmigration of souls. And as you say, for millennia in our part of the world, we've accepted that. It's accepted, it's a founding tenet of Buddhism, if you like. So.
And one of the, I apologize to anyone who's very attached to their belief in past life regression. I was making fun of it earlier because in cases that I've heard, the past life regression usually links you to some kind of romantic past life as a royal, you know, Rajput princess or something. But one of the wonderful things that happens in this, you know, in the motivating event over here is that the past life is as unglamorous as can be. It's the life of a impoverished, whatever, rural fisherwoman that appears in the household of an extremely privileged Calcutta Hindu family. And with that comes a lot that's unexpected. You know, you think of it's not that person who manifests is deprived. They're actually enriched with all kinds of things that have to be discovered, because we don't otherwise think of fisherwomen as having special knowledge or having something very important to share.
Yeah, actually, that's a pattern in these. I mean, the research on reincarnation actually shows that one of the weird things is that often children who remember a much lower status past life, a much poorer past life, they're even more attached to that life than they are to their present circumstances.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's a Bengali word for reincarnation. It's called Jatishwar, right? I'm just wondering if Bengalis have more of a propensity for belief in reincarnation. Is there any other community or whatever Indians who have another name for reincarnation? Would you know?
I think the propensity for reincarnation or the actual cases of occurrence are pretty much all over the country. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was one case I suddenly remembered. There's a cameraman called Nando Bhattacharya, and he spoke about his sister's child. They were born in a village or something like that. I don't really know. But around the age of 4, she started saying, this is not the food I like.
That's right.
In my home, I had another kind of food. And she actually apparently led them to a village which was close by. And those people said that, yes, there was somebody death in the family. So it was really kind of authentic.
There are hundreds of thousands of cases like that.
Sure.
There's really a lot to learn about this. I mean, if you're like me, then you've really never given it any thought. And there's a great deal in terms of all the dimensions of what reincarnation really means, that a lot of which is reflected in the cases of the reincarnation type, the phrase that keeps coming up in this novel. I think we'll just have one, maybe two more questions, since you two have...
There's a lot of hands back there and over here.
Yeah, I know there are.
Hi, Amitav.
Hi.
I like Raghu and a few others have had, experienced synchronicity while reading the book. With your earlier books, they were like allopathy treatment that you take, and you're happy, you start feeling good, you start feeling better. But this book is more like homeopathy. You take it, and it is, if it works on you, if you believe in it. So my question to you is that, there is no barrier between you and your reader when you're writing as an author, but the gatekeeper becomes the publisher. And they, usually publishers, how they are, the corporate way that they function, are more for the popular treatment or the allopathy. And so did they gatekeep in any way, or does that not work for popular writers?
Well, my editor who just spoke to you earlier, he loved the book from the start and has been incredibly supportive. That's been true of my UK editor, my US editor, my Italian editor. So no, I can't say they've done any gatekeeping. But what I do have is I have a wonderful copy editor called Shatarupa Ghoshal, who works at HarperCollins. And she's been copy editing my work for a long time, and she's a Bengali, and she's very involved in cooking, and it was really intense dealing with her, because I could see she was always correcting the recipes or this or that, and that was fun.
Hello, I am...
Please go ahead, and
Sorry.
if there's another mic for the gentleman in the back, then I think we can wrap up.
All right. I'm an English major student, and this was my first book of yours, which I read, and I can't wait to get into others. And I loved it so much. My question to you was, how do you give your characters the space to be who they are individually? Because everything I have tried writing, the characters tend to sound the same, like me, because I'm writing them.
The making of characters is in its own way a little bit uncanny, because at a certain point, the character takes over, and you're no longer in control of them. And they're doing things that you wouldn't necessarily want them to do. And that's when you know that a character has really come alive and seized its own agency.
Thank you, Amitav and Raghu, for the conversation. What's your view on your peers that write so that the books can become movies? And if someone were to convert yours into a movie, Bollywood or Hollywood would do a better job?
Well, I've had many filmmakers expressing interest in my books, and they bought options and this and that. But it's never worked out so far. And I think that's because my books are kind of film-proof, I like to think. They're just too weird and kind of complicated.
Good evening, my name is Akshay, and my question is, do you find there is a midpoint that balances, one is the believers of mystical occurrences, and the other that is your background as a believer of rationalism? Somehow, when I was hearing you, I could see that there is a complement happening between each with the others. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think in this book, there's a constant running dialogue between a skeptic and rationalist and the others. And I think that's a very necessary conversation. It's in all our heads. I mean, Rabindranath Tagore wrote many ghost stories. But always in those ghost stories, there's some skeptic, You know, there's some rationalist. Because that's what makes the story interesting, you know, because if you just uncritically accept that the whole world is kind of weird and so on, then it becomes hard to live, no? I mean, in an everyday reality. So, yeah, I think there always has to be a balance.
You know, I'm just thinking back to the previous question about Hollywood or Bollywood, and it just occurred to me that the one place in which reincarnation does come up and sort of impresses itself on you in the culture is in Hindi films. So we are in the city where Om Shanti Om, among others, was filmed. So I'm sure there are more highbrow examples. I'm sorry. And Madhumati, thank you. So. Maybe it's not too weird. Maybe Bollywood is the answer. Or
maybe, actually, you know, there's a very good Netflix series called, you know, it's something like Life Beyond the Dead or whatever. And the last edition, I mean, the last episode in the series is about this young American boy who claimed to have been a pilot in the Second World War. And he remembered the Battle of Midway, he remembered his plane, he remembered his fellow pilots, he remembered them by name, and they were traced. You know, it's an astonishing thing. Just if you want to look at a documentary about reincarnation, that's the one to watch.
But read the book first. I promise you, as however good the documentary is, the book is rich with much more. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Raghu, for a wonderful session.
Oh, is that a young person there? Okay, you know what? Just give it to us. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. I'm sure everyone will. Great question. Thank you. Did everyone hear this?
Great question, yes.
Is fish curry just a dish, or is Amitav representing it as a source of peace and inspiration and other things?
What can give you more happiness than a good fish curry?
On that very happy note, thank you, Amitav, for this illuminating discussion. Hopefully, as I was joking with Q, you'll be back next January with another book, and hopefully that could be inspired by the Phantom of the Opera or homeopathy, I heard. But thank you, Raghu, for that illuminating discussion. It's always a pleasure hearing you in conversation with Amitav. Amitav's going to be signing books outside. If you haven't bought your copies, please do so. Thank you all for being here. I've got a couple of quick thank yous to do. Thank you to the Literature Live team, Kwasar, Amy, Rima, to HarperCollins, Naya, Akriti, Udyan, and Anand, and to the Royal Opera House teams and the Avid Learning teams. As we begin the new cultural year, tonight's discussion, tomorrow we are all going to be at the NCPA at ADF, so please be there. And we have many more interesting conversations and performances lined up at the Opera House. So do join us, stalk us on social media, or follow us on or check out our website for more details. Again, thank you very much for being in such numbers. As I said, Amitav is going to be signing books. Just be in line. It's going to be a bit of a queue, but it's worth the wait. Thank you very much and have a good evening.